Ukraine has been destroying Russia's tanks by the bucket load. A staggering 11,256 of them have been taken out as of October 14th, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. But Vladimir Putin, in his infinite wisdom, thought he had it all figured out. Ukraine was just destroying the Soviet-era tanks, the ones that were meant to burn through Ukraine's ammunition rather than make a real dent in its defenses. Putin was keeping Russia's best tanks away from Ukraine. Finally, Russia's leader unleashed those tanks on Pokrovsk, and in no time at all, Ukraine proved that they were no better than the tanks that Russia had already lost. Russia saved its best tanks for a year, only for Ukraine to crush them in minutes. For almost a year, Russia carefully stockpiled every T-90M tank that it was building, knowing that it had special plans in place for those tanks. That's according to David Axe, writing for Euromaidan Press, who says that Putin was planning a major mechanized assault on the Donetsk Oblast with Russia's T-90Ms. Those tanks were supposed to finish off the last of Ukraine's resistance, allowing Russia to finally claim the key logistical city of Pokrovsk that Putin originally thought his troops would take during the summer. Russia's soldiers failed. The T-90Ms would finish the job. And Putin had every reason to believe that the T-90M was the right tank to finally take Pokrovsk. After all, it's Russia's most modern battle tank, and has been hailed by Putin himself as the best tank in the world. Russia's leader said as much in June 2023, with TASS reporting Putin as claiming, "It can be said today that the T-90M Proryev is the world's best tank. As soon as it approaches positions, no chance is left for anyone or anything. It fires into a longer range and more accurately, it also has better protection." Keep that quote in mind. Ukraine proved it wrong on October 9th in devastating fashion. The T-90M's reported specifications certainly seem to lend credence to Putin's claims. Army recognition says the tank packs the kind of punch Putin claims it has, thanks to a 125mm 2A46M4 smoothbore gun that's capable of firing both standard ammunition and anti-tank guided missiles. Depending on the types of round used, the gun can hit targets at a range of up to about 13,120 feet, with its missiles traveling even further, 16,400 feet, thanks to a laser beam riding-based guidance system. Add a PKT 7.62mm coaxial machine gun into the mix, and you get a tank that can shred through infantry and destroy almost any armor that it comes across, or so Russia claims. It's also a fairly agile tank. The T-90M can hit a top speed of around 37.2 miles per hour and can travel for 341 miles before it needs to refuel. Russia has the option of carrying a pair of diesel fuel tanks under the hull's rear, which allows for refueling in the field and possible extension of this maximum range. Protection comes from the Relict system, which is a form of explosive reactive armor that's supposed to protect the T-90M's front and turret from blasts. Russia also installs a Q-net armor kit onto the tank's hull and rear, which is designed to protect the T-90M against rocket-propelled grenades. It all adds up to an impressive tank, at least on paper. Putin's problem is simple. What looks great on paper doesn't always end up being able to perform when it's put to the test on the battlefield. In the T-90M's case, a lot of firepower and protection against explosions doesn't mean much when Ukraine brings so many different types of weapons to a fight. Still, Putin thought he had the right tank for launching a new mechanized assault near Pokrovsk on October 9th. This assault would see Russia reverting to type after spending the summer sending small groups of infantry to infiltrate settlements around Pokrovsk. Russia's target, Axe explains, was the small village of Shakova, and he'd amassed an intimidating force. The village, which is located about 12.4 miles north of Pokrovsk, was to be subjected to 36 Russian tanks, including plenty of T-90Ms and armored fighting vehicles, in addition to 40 motorcycle troops. Axe notes that Shakova is also an anchor for Ukraine's defenses that lie east of a 24.8-mile salient that Russia managed to carve through Ukraine's defenses in the Pokrovsk direction during the summer. Russia's objective was clear. If it could overrun Shakova with this mechanized assault, it will be able to embed its troops into the village. With fortification complete, Shakova could then be used as a launching pad for future assaults that would take Russia closer to and eventually into Pokrovsk. On October 9th, that mechanized force launched its attack. The outcome was brutal for Russia. Ukraine was prepared for everything that Russia was going to throw at it on October 9th. Shakova was already home to Ukraine's 225th Assault Regiment. Their numbers have been supplemented by operatives from the notorious 1st Azov Corps, which spent the latter part of the summer coordinating the retaking of several settlements near Pokrovsk from Russia. Those two units worked together to construct a defense that would overcome Russia's mechanized assault. The assault came in waves, as the 1st Azov Corps recounted in a telegram post in the battle's aftermath. The enemy carried out offensive actions in several waves and from different directions, the group said. Initially, groups of motorcyclists advanced, followed by columns of armored vehicles, tanks and armored personnel carriers with infantry. That seems like a Putin-approved approach. Rather than sending the tanks and armored vehicles in first, Russia sent in its vulnerable motorcycle troops to soak up Ukraine's ammunition. The idea may have been to leave Ukraine's defenses without the ammo needed to take on the tanks that followed. Instead, as Russia attempted to advance in waves, mines, drones and artillery stopped the mechanized assault in its tracks. Ukraine managed to hit 20 of Russia's vehicles, including a trio of its tanks, in a defensive bombardment that forced Russia's forces to scatter back to the contested village of Volodymyrivka. That village, which is just south of Shkova, was then targeted throughout the night of October 9th and into 10th by Ukrainian bomber drones, which were deployed to pick off any survivors. There were no Russian forces left in Volodymyrivka by the end of the night, and the numbers make for terrible reading for Putin. By the end of the assault, Russia had lost 3 of its tanks, 16 of its armored fighting vehicles, and 41 motorcycles. 2 more light vehicles were also destroyed, the 1st Azov Corps says. It's unclear what these light vehicles were, however, Russia has a track record of sending civilian vehicles into assaults against Ukraine, to the point where Axe reports in a separate article that civilian cars now make up 90% of Russia's vehicle losses in Ukraine. So it's possible that some of Putin's soldiers had even worse protection than that offered by the T-90M tanks and armored vehicles of which Russia is so proud. Speaking of Russia's soldiers, they had a very bad day on October 9th. The 1st Azov Corps says that confirmed enemy losses amounted to 107 irreversible and 51 medical. We can assume that means 107 dead and 51 injured, which accounts for the majority of the troops Russia sent to assault Shkova. Axe adds that it isn't clear which of Russia's units it dedicated to the mechanized assault. However, it's possible that the soldiers were part of the 5 Marine brigades that Russia sent to Pokrovsk in response to Ukraine's deployment of the 1st Azov Corps in the region. If that's the case, the Russian troops that died in droves in the Shkova attack were among the best that Russia has to offer outside of its special forces. Even Russia's best can't do much when the tanks they drive aren't as good as their leader claims them to be. What happened on October 9th was a humiliation for Russia. For months, Russia kept its best tanks off the battlefield, confident that those tanks were finally in a position to succeed. They were deployed alongside other armored vehicles and dozens of soldiers. This was an assault literally a year in the making, and Ukraine shut it down in devastating fashion, requiring less than a day to do so. Putin just relearned a valuable lesson on October 9th. Ukraine has all of the answers for dealing with Russia's mechanized assaults. Russia's leader will now be left asking himself the question of how this all happened. And the answer comes down to the tank that he himself has revered for so long. The reality that Putin is now realizing is that the T-90M is far from the tank he claims it to be. Rather, it's yet another relic of the Soviet era that has been dressed up for the modern day and is being paraded as the world's best tank, even as results show that it doesn't deserve that distinction. The T-90M is simply a symptom of Russia's overconfidence in the outdated technology that it still uses. That overconfidence was on perfect display as recently as May 2025. After delivering a new batch of T-90Ms to the military, the tank's manufacturer, Russia's state-owned Rostec, was very keen to extol its virtues. The Russian T-90M, T-72B3M, and T-80BVM are vehicles best suited for present-day conditions of combat, Rostec's first deputy CEO, Vladimir Artyakov, said in May. They can be considered as the world's best serial-produced tanks in terms of their aggregate characteristics. This is the result of the well-coordinated work by the large staff of Rostec enterprises, developers, designers, engineers and technologists, workers of industrial facilities and repair groups. We can understand the hyperbole around the T-90M. Russia needs everybody to believe that the tank is the world's best for propaganda and intimidation purposes, but the T-72 and the T-80, the old tanks that Ukraine has been destroying by the hundreds since Putin launched his invasion, those 2 tanks being entered into the conversation immediately casts doubt on how effective the T-90M can be given their poor performance in Ukraine. Still, doubt doesn't overcome the impressive specifications Russia offers up for its T-90M. The tank's terrible performance in Ukraine turns doubt into certainty. The T-90Ms that Russia stockpiled for its assault in Shkova aren't the only ones that it has deployed into Ukraine during the war. They're just the latest, and just like those that came before, they have dramatically failed. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody who's decided to look beyond Russia's specifications to find out what the T-90M is really all about. The Small Wars Journal highlights some of the problems with the T-90M that Russia has been hiding for decades. Yes, Russia's ultra-modern battle tank is actually decades old. Granted, it's not quite a Soviet-era tank, as it entered production in 1994. However, that production date means that the T-90M has existed for over 3 decades in one form or another. Plus, as the journal points out, the tank saw practically no combat action at all until Putin decided to launch the Ukraine invasion. What Russia really has on its hands in Ukraine is a tank that is being actively combat tested inside Ukraine, a tank that is coming up short in every single department. One of the few other times the T-90M was deployed before Ukraine was when it was used in Syria back in December 2015, the journal claims. One of the 6 tanks Syria received came up against several BGM-71 TOW anti-tank guided missiles, and it managed to survive the encounters. That would have raised Russia's confidence in its tank, though it also doesn't mean much from a modern perspective. BGM-71s are hardly the newest anti-tank weapons available. They've been in service since 1970, making them much older than the T-90M itself. You would expect Russia's best-in-the-world battle tank to be able to absorb hits from a weapon built 24 years before the tank was deployed. Russia's problem, as it discovered in Ukraine, is that the T-90M isn't capable of dealing with modern anti-tank missiles or the hordes of drones that Ukraine has built since 2022. Weaknesses abound in the design of Russia's supposedly world-beating tank. One of those weaknesses is a holdover from the T-72. That Soviet-era tank lacks the partition that separates its crew from the ammunition stored in the tank. Without that partition, the T-72's ammunition exploding destroys both tank and crew. The T-90M has the same lack of a partition, with Russia instead favoring a carousel that makes the tank a death trap if it's struck by a top-down weapon. Guess what Ukraine has? Drones, Javelin missiles, and several other anti-tank weapons against which the T-90M was completely untested before the Ukraine war exposed its fatal flaws. The best tank in the world still carries many of the Soviet-era design flaws that have led to so many thousands of its older brethren becoming little more than flaming wreckages on the Ukrainian battlefield. It's not just these types of structural design flaws that make the T-90M a far weaker tank than Russia claims. The tank is also plagued with technical issues. Take its turret, for instance. In addition to being vulnerable to top-down strikes, that turret also has an interesting design flaw. The flaw was exposed by Forbes in May 2022, which named the issue spinning turret syndrome. When the T-90M is hit in a certain way, its turret starts spinning around uncontrollably, making the tank's impressive firepower practically useless. There have been several examples of this fatal flaw being exposed by Ukraine. In January 2024, Ukraine managed to take out a T-90M using a pair of M2 Bradley vehicles that should, in theory, have been unable to penetrate the T-90M's armor. Spinning turret syndrome was the cause of the Russian tank's failure. Something similar was seen in December 2023, when one of Ukraine's first-person view or FPV drones scored a direct hit on the T-90M to send its turret into an uncontrollable spin that led to the crew losing control of the entire tank. And in May 2024, another T-90M tank struck by several of Ukraine's FPV drones ended up experiencing the same problem. The turret started rotating clockwise after the second drone strike, and as was the case with the other 2 incidents, the Russian crew was forced to abandon the tank. It should go without saying that a tank that is meant to be the best the world has ever seen shouldn't have this kind of technical problem. What use is armor that's capable of protecting the T-90M's crew when the tank itself becomes uncontrollable thanks to some kind of design flaw that should have been caught decades ago? We say should have. The reality is that Russia would never have even thought to look for this type of flaw because drone strikes weren't even a consideration when the T-90 entered production in 1994. And that brings us back to the point that this tank is not only far less modern than Russia tries to claim, but that it's also built on the back of outdated Soviet-era designs that aren't suitable for modern warfare. The national interest makes that clear in an article examining the T-90M's many failures before Ukraine wiped out several of them in a single day on October 9th. It notes that strategic mistakes were partly to blame for so many T-90Ms being taken out, as Russia was deploying them in urban regions that don't offer the space a tank needs to operate effectively. However, it was new weapons that were the main problem for Russia's tank. The advent of new threats appears to have rendered obsolete some of the defenses of the T-90. Loitering munitions such as the Lancet, as well as top-attack anti-tank guided munitions such as the US-made Javelin have so far proved effective against the Stora defense system, the national interest reports. Add drones to that list. Ukraine did, and it showed what these drones, along with mines and artillery, can do to Russia's T-90Ms on October 9th. Given that its most modern tank has failed so often in Ukraine, you would be forgiven for thinking that Russia is going to give up the ghost on the T-90M. You would be incorrect. Russia is not only going to keep on pushing with the tank, but it's also looking to boost its stockpiles even further. Whether it can or not is another matter. In June, United 24 media reported that Russia was significantly expanding the production of the T-90M. It quoted the Conflict Intelligence Team, which claims that Russia managed to build between 280 and 300 of these tanks in 2024, which represented a marked increase on the numbers built in previous years. There were between 60 and 70 T-90Ms made in 2022, followed by Russia building between 140 and 180 of the tanks the following year. The thing is, that supposed mass production isn't going to do much to replace the enormous numbers of tanks Russia has lost in Ukraine. We told you in the introduction to this video that Ukraine claims to have destroyed 11,251 of Russia's tanks. That amounts to about 3,000 per year, so a T-90M production schedule that only produces a tenth of that number isn't going to worry Ukraine when it's already proven many times, and again on October 9th, that it can destroy T-90Ms just as easily as it takes out Russia's older tanks. So why is Russia trying to mass-produce the T-90M when it's clearly a failure? United 24 media hints that Russia is trying to stockpile for the future. Whether that means it's rebuilding its tank stock or it's getting ready for a time when it'll be able to start selling the T-90M isn't clear. Perhaps that means the T-90Ms Russia deployed to Shakova were pulled from the stockpiles Russia is trying to save because of the combination of past tank losses and the country's failure to take Pokrovsk during the summer. We can't say for sure. But what does seem more certain is that Russia may have a very hard time selling T-90Ms after Ukraine. Frankly, it was having a hard enough time even before the war started. Russia seemed to be onto a winner back in 2019. That's when India committed to buying 469 T-90Ms in an order that Meta Defense estimated to be worth about $2 billion. That amounts to a per-unit cost of over $4.2 million, which may make it clear why Russia is trying to mass-produce the T-90. Earning over $1 billion per year from 280 to 300 of these tanks would be helpful, given that Putin is spending billions on the Ukraine war. However, India wasn't happy with the T-90s it received from Russia. By September 2020, the tank was being criticized for its poor performance. Global Defense Corps also adds that the Indian Army used the T-90s it had back in 2017 as part of a Russian tank biathlon that included 19 countries. India lost that biathlon because its T-90s malfunctioned. By 2024, the National Interest was reporting that India was rebuilding its T-90s almost from the ground up to make them tanks that could actually be usable in modern warfare. And a couple of years prior, Global Defense Corps said that India had ditched future plans to buy T-90s, preferring instead the French Leclerc tank. Much of this happened before Putin started the war in Ukraine. In other words, the T-90M was already seen as a failure by one of Russia's main weapons customers long before it proved itself to be one in Ukraine. All of this brings us back to October 9th and what Ukraine achieved against Russia's mechanized assault. The T-90M's faults were again on display, as it not only failed to help Russia complete that assault, but was also so powerless against Ukraine's drones, mines and artillery that the assault lasted for less than a day. Russia will likely continue to deploy T-90Ms from its stockpiles. Ukraine will just keep destroying them, turning the world's best tank into little more than an afterthought on the battlefield. The T-90M is just one example of the many failures of Putin's that are tearing Russia apart. Frankly, Russia's president has even bigger issues on his hands than a modern tank that is anything but great. Find out what those issues are in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk and the surrounding settlements. And thank you as always for watching.